Thank you so much. And it's very nice to be here with all of you. I mean, even virtually, so many greetings from Madrid. Actually, I'm here because we have another conference today at the IE on AI, law and technology. So, I mean, I would be more than happy to come there, but it's very, very nice to meet you all, even virtually. I will just share my screen. Sorry, I'm a little bit of light because I'm close to the window. I will just share my screen and so start this presentation. And I hope that we'll find reasons also to discuss, to talk more about the question around AI and values, especially in the European Union. Sorry, just a second. Okay. Can I just ask you whether you can see my screen? Usual question at the Zoom time. Yes, I think it's so because I can see from.
Yeah, the screen is there.
Okay.
We will have you on one screen. Yeah, full screen, and we will have you on one screen so they can still see you, and on the other one there's the presentation.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, let's start because, I mean, we have 15 minutes, so we have not that much time. We have so many things to say, actually, to be fair, you know? So, I mean, again, good morning, everyone. So this is just about to have like some perspectives around the role of European values in the AI Act. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around the AI Act, and we're still talking about whether the AI Act will be able not only to provide, you know, a general legal framework, or maybe the first legal framework, comprehensive legal framework at the international level, but also whether it will be able not only to promote, for example, innovation, sustainability for these technologies in the internal market, but it will also be able to protect. I mean, I will try to understand what does it mean, you know, the European values, because they are so relevant, especially when you look at the recitals of the proposal for the Artificial Intelligence Act. So what we're going to do today, you know, is actually ask this, we'll try to look at these 3 points, you know. First of all, I mean, just very quickly, we'll try to frame the AI Act because we cannot start, I mean, it's not very useful that I will explain to you why the AI Act is important, what is the scope of application, what are the definitions, because you can definitely ever read the proposal. So my role is not that one. I'm trying to give you some perspective and inputs on the AI Act, especially, first of all, framing, you know, and explaining to you where the AI Act come from, so the past in a certain sense. I will tell you about the present, about the role of European values and the Artificial Intelligence Act. So what are the challenges, but also the opportunities. And then we'll speak about the future, you know, especially the expansion of the risk-based approach and the role of the principle of proportionality in this framework. So guys, we'll start from the past, we'll go to the present, and then we'll end with the future. So this will be my contribution today, but let's focus on the first point, the past, okay? The past. So we know that there are, I do not need to take a lot of time to explain that we have faced, especially constitutional democracies, and even the EU faced constitutional challenges in terms of clash and also complexity in terms of the protection of not only fundamental rights, but also democratic values, generally speaking, you know, and I don't need to explain why. And we know very well that generally speaking, constitutional democracy struggle with 2 things. First of all, protecting, of course, the fundamental rights, because they are quite relevant, you know, like whatever, you know, could be freedom of expression. One of the big issue is the limitation of power. The limitation of power and the limitation of public and private powers. So this does not just concern, you know, the exercise of authority, you know, but it's also, especially now in the digital age, one of the big questions is about how we can deal with freedoms in the private sector that increasingly turns into form of power. And these are questions, you know, that are very much important when we frame the discussion within the AI Act, because these constitutional challenges, as we will see soon, have been one of the reasons that has led the European Union to change its approach, you know, and to adopt a new strategy. Because the questions for digital constitutionalism, that is precisely what we're also talking about in this presentation, is that we have not anymore a problem, you know, an issue only from states regulating, from states interfering with rights and freedoms, but we have a mix of actors that are able to express their normative power. So what I mean, it does not mean that it's only the state that is able to regulate, but also there are other actors, and even technology especially automated decision-making technologies, is increasingly able to set standards, that of course change across the time with experience. And I'm referring to cases of machine learning and deep learning that are quite relevant also when we focus on the AI Act. So this is why I'm telling you that, because nowadays it's very hard to talk about the rule of law, in the digital age. What we are talking about, it's probably the rules of law, and it's particularly when we talk about the rule of tech. So it means that we have increasingly spaces for norms that do not only come from, the authority, the public authority, the states that want to regulate a certain technology, but come from a mix of different actors that are able to express their own powers, And this is quite important to understand, especially when we try to look at the reaction of the EU, because to these constitutional challenges, the shift from public to private and the role of technology, we had constitutional reactions, particularly in the European Union. And this is what I'm trying to call the rise of European digital constitutionalism, where actually we've seen the European Union actually not abandoning, because that is not a big deal. It's not abandoning, it's complementing its strategy and the internal market goals with its constitutional and we can say European values, constitutional values, and we will see what does it mean. And so what we've seen the last 20 years is that we have actually left, an approach that was just, focused on the internal market circulation like services or digital services, think about the end of the last century, and we slightly shift to a process that is more focused on democratic values and the role of substantive and procedural safeguards, and also the risk-based approach. These parts, this shift that happened from digital liberalism to digital constitutionalism in the Union is nothing else actually that a path that was very much rooted in the European values, and this is why it's very much connected to the AI Act, because if we try to look at how, but we have no time to talk about that, how the US, for example, has answered to this challenge, the picture is very different. You will never find this kind of evolution, but you will find a form of omission. You'll find like something that is not really changed in the last 20 years, apart from some very, very small exception, but it's not like a very comprehensive reaction. Maybe you can talk about whether this reaction is good or bad, but it's still a constitutional reactions to those challenges. And the AI Act, and then now we are going into the details, is really part of this picture. Let's try to understand. I really do not like to put so much text in a slide, but it's just to show you what's the point also, There is a form of duality of European values in the AI Act, but this is not just the AI Act. It's actually the duality of European values in the internal market, Basically, as you can see, if you look at the parts in bold, you can see, of course, that there is always the need to protect the internal market goals. So the freedom, the four freedoms, basically, the traditional ones. But at certain times, these freedoms should be aligned with your union values. And this is interesting. This comes from the recital of the AI Act. But if you look at the second sentence, the second block, it's opposite. There are public interests, like constitutional interests to protect. But if you read the opposite, it said that it's still, you need to ensure the free movement of AI-based goods and services. So if you're interested, it's quite interesting to see this chiasm in a certain sense, first internal market goal and then fundamental rights and then fundamental rights and then internal market goals. This shows the duality of European values. And even if European values usually can be referred, for example, to Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union, like dignity, democracy, human rights, rule of law, it is not very clear about whether those European values are just those, for example, provided in Article 2, because we know very well that even internal market goals are quite constitutional parts of the European picture, So this also really suggests how it is true that the AI Act want to protect dignity, European values, and constitutional values, like even human rights, but at certain points as a strong internal market goal orientation, So we're looking now at the present. And this is very important because when you look at the European values in the AI Act, you look at even the role of the human, within the code, basically, you cannot really see so many explicit references to these values beyond the recitals, If you look at these recitals, it looks, this is very inspired by the European values, you know, but you never get actually what these European values are when you look at the articles of the European Artificial Intelligence Act. Sorry, I don't want to bothering you with text, but it's just, I mean, the idea is that it's more like the recital looks more like a constitutional document rather than, you know, being an interpretive guidelines. But the same is for the concept of dignity. You know, if you look at the AI Act, you search for the concept of dignity or the dignity, you know, in the details, hidden in the lines of the legislation, it's very hard to find something that was also supported by the human-centric approach, you know, that was proposed and again supported by the high-level expert group on AI. So I mean, when you read the AI Act and you first read the recitals and then you read the text, you say, oh, maybe something is not really, I mean, I cannot say this is wrong, but you see there is something that is not coherent, especially when you read the first part and then you read the text actually of the AI Act. In a certain sense, there is a top-down approach, as we know very well, and we'll see in the next slides, but there is a kind of, generally speaking, of disconnection between the individual dimension that was so strong, it was supposed to be that strong, and the regulatory approach that is very, very strong. Why? Because risk, the notion of risk, as increasingly spreading, you know, and so now we are also looking at the AI Act again, is increasingly spreading in European regulation, especially in European digital policy. And risk, you know, it's always by definition a balancing between different things, you know, but when it comes to constitutional values, risks actually becomes a balancing between, in this case, the need to protect rights and the challenges in ensuring a sustainable deployment of artificial intelligence technologies, okay? And why this is quite relevant in the AI Act, because the notion of risk comes from the top. So it's actually the European Commission that provides you, that tells you from the top, which are the risks that are acceptable or are not acceptable. So in this case, we have like a kind of risk-based approach coming from the top and trying to protect European values from the top. It's very different, for example, the General Data Protection Regulation. In a certain sense, leaves a lot of room to the data controller, for example, to decide how to protect sometimes the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. In this case, a lot of the obligation comes from the top, but it's very interesting that there is not so much space, for example, for the user, for the individual, for the remedies, because this process is not really bottom-up process, regulatory speaking, but it very comes from the top. It's more a conversation, it's more of a dialogue between the regulator and the provider of these services, or goods or services with AI. It's not just about trying to protect the values of the individuals. It's more kind of regulating a space without taking into account individuals. So what does it mean? It means that those European values that are in the recitals becomes interpretative guidelines. So when you actually conduct a risk-based approach from the top, but also for the businesses when they need to implement the Artificial Intelligence Act. But still, this does not mean there are enough remedies also for the users, because the regulation does not really put at the center the individual, but more, you know, the businesses, not only the businesses, but the providers of these technologies and the regulator, especially. And we know, I mean, that risk and proportionality, it's still a balance, you know, because it's always a balance between ensuring a certain acceptable degree of risk in technology. But of course, since we need, as we have seen at the beginning, going back here, since you always need to, in a certain sense, reconcile the need to ensure the internal market goals with the union values, this is a balancing. This is a balancing that is expressed, and this is the future of European digital policy, by the expansion of the risk-based approach. Risk-based approach that you can see not only in the AI Act, as you can see in the right side of the table, but also in the GDPR and, for example, in the Digital Services Act. There are different ways in which the European Commission is relying on the notion of risk to regulate these spaces. And this is quite important because also the way in which the risk-based approach is expanding in this area in the future is really different. If you look at the GDPR, it's a very different way to approach risks rather than, for example, the AI Act. So what is very, very, very important is to take into account that the notion of risk is expanding, but still is not applying coherently or uniformly across different pieces of digital policies in Europe. And since I do not want to waste time, you know, but I want also to have then a chat with you in the second part. It's about which are the perspectives. Again, past, present, future. Of course, we've seen in the past how the union, because the union wants to protect its European values, is, of course, has reacted to the challenges of the algorithmic society. And the AI Act is exactly an example of European digital constitutionalism, for good or bad. But at a certain times, the AI Act, we know that it aims to provide this first regulatory framework, but still, it, in a certain sense, it still does not fail because it's still under negotiation, but it does not provide still enough internal protection for European values. It provides more external protection from interference coming from other technological models, but internally for the individual, it seems that it failed to provide this, to deliver this form of protection that it was supposed to be there actually, based on the conversation, the debates around that. And in the future, we've seen that risk-based regulation is increasingly seen as a principle-based regulation. So as a regulation of principle, a balancing of principle that is focused on proportionality. And this will be probably the future and where actually it will become relevant to talk about the balancing between European values in the AI Act. So, I mean, I wanted just to conclude saying, if you are very interested, I also share with Alexandra these materials, but if you are very, very interested in that, this is a paper we work on with another colleague of mine, on this topic, on the risk-based approach in European digital policy. And if you are very, very interested, this is my open access book where you can find actually how the European Union has reacted to these challenges and what is the role of the AI Act in this picture. I think that I just need to thank you so much for your attention, and I'm really, really, really looking forward to your questions or comments in the second part. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Second talk. You see the question mark in the title. That's important because this is more on the side of basic research questions on how we can make that happen, ethico-legal governance. And what I mean by that, of course, should be clear now a few slides further. I want to connect to the initial talk I gave on the topic of what is AI, just to bridge again to my position raised there. So of course we have here the prediction of, and it's more than a prediction, that AI is the steam engine of the 21st century, all this rise and all this interest in the technology. And we have talks, we had talks here, very interesting one on wonderful and interesting applications of AI, for instance, in direction of climate change. But we always have to be reflective, and reflection in general is very important in my approach to also the question, what makes an AI system really intelligent? And we should be intelligent ourselves, and always on an reflection level also ask about the con sides of applications of AI. Not only about the pro sides. And here, for instance, the question would be, well, it has an energy problem too. So we have to see how high are the costs for application of AI technology in relation to the impact we can eventually get. That's just one point that's relative to mention again. Another one that's also important to understand my position later on is that I personally come also from the angle in my research from formal software verification. So the notion of trust in traditional software development has been that we don't even, for high critical applications, trust the testing of a software product. Ideally, we go for formal verification, meaning formal proof that this product is 100% correct. But now with the modern AI technology, we have to be aware that we step away from such a position for high software applications, and we more or less deploy and use systems that are, and again, a slightly provocative statement here, imperfect by design, because I mean, we train them with imperfect data, we test then the models for accuracy, and of course, 100% accuracy is what we seldom will get in practical applications. And that is actually creating lots of the problems we have. How can we really trust these systems when we apply them in the highest critical application areas, which we probably shouldn't do. And I agree here with the IE Act that we should limit it. But look at this. Some of the AI systems are already in use. I mean, we had in the last weeks these headlines about the use of the Shahed 136 drone in the war. An Iranian made kind of suicide drone with a high degree of autonomy. So this is a kind of system that is integrating eventually even conventional AI technology, as you can buy it on the market. So already now, systems can be manufactured and used that are of high criticality. And this is, of course, a problem. And here we have, of course, also the idea out there of a human in the loop. But think about such kind of natures of operation of highest complexity and time criticality, whether that at all can work. So a human in the loop in some of these applications where it's really about time criticality and the complex environment you have to judge about is eventually not capable of doing anything meaningful within a few seconds or a minute or so, right? So this is an tension we have to look at. So systems are partly already in use of high criticality, and we have this problem that these requests for human in the loop don't work. I'm in the position that we should, for instance, in such applications, step away from using them, but it's difficult. I mean, we had in that direction an often a brief here for an initiative for an international treaty about autonomy in weapon system in EVAZ. You can't read it very well here. That were all the signees, and I was also among them, many other prominent persons here from Germany and Europe. So my position is ideally don't use them in high critical applications, but we are already doing it. So, and to connect to my talk from Monday, you remember that I said, well, machine learning is good for certain tasks, but it's lacking many aspects that I would consider relevant for really intelligent entities. The capability of self-reflection, the abstract and rational reasoning aspect. So to theorize your patterns and to make them available eventually to something like formal verification and thought experiments on an abstract layer, and the capabilities in the direction of social interaction. And it's exactly the lacking of these principles in current AI systems that make me wonder, and again, a slightly provocative statement here, whether our current AI systems actually have any clue of what they are doing. And even more provocative, whether we know what we are doing when we leave increasingly critical decisions to such systems, which have no clue about what they are doing in the context of their decision making. And therefore, the question here is this kind of normative directionlessness and unpredictability with now reference also to this movie here with James Dean in the Hauptrolle, denn sie wissen nicht, was sie tun. The German translation of that movie title is just excellent, right? So then they don't know what they are doing. This is actually, I think, what we are currently developing in terms of AI systems. So systems that we put out there give a certain degree of autonomy, but they have no clue actually about their own actions and their own behavior and so on. So it's no real self-reflection capabilities. I argue actually, therefore, that we have to think about a kind of normative societal control, really control layer for AI systems, an independent one that also gets back a little bit of this perspective of verified trust in systems, so formal verification in a sense. And you see, I related here to the AI Act. I'm talking, or I'm interested in particular in AI applications, let's say on the, on the top of this pyramid. The red ones we shouldn't go for and eventually get international treaties and prohibit them. But the orange ones eventually need different methods for making them really trusted, and that is stronger than trustworthy, as we need at the lower layers for the yellow layer or the green layer. And well, this is a methodological question also. And in my personal perspective and my own work, I'm very much influenced then by also having a look at, for instance, how human possibly do it. So we could look into theories in psychology or moral psychology. And there you find this distinction between these two layers. System one, a fast, intuitive action layer. And in the other side, or orthogonal to that, a slow rational reflection and control layer. So most of our decision making every day is mainly done with system one actions. I react instantaneously to input, and that creates certain kind of reactions. And I see it in, for instance, stressful situations with my kids, that I have instantaneous reactions on how I actually interact with them, which I later then regret in a reflection process. And I say, no, that was not right. But in this stressful situation, you just reacted this way. And eventually this reflection process then has an influence on how I will behave the next time. So there's a kind of feedback loop here. The problem, the slow reflection and control layer, is that this is slower typically. So post hoc reasoning and thought experiments involved. And so it's also slower to implement eventually on computers. And this fast and intuitive action layer here, I see as correlation to what we currently do in AI with training models, right? And I would therefore ask for, can we find methodologically architectures that reflect what we humans do? So the integration of such a fast intuitive action layer with a reflective control layer. And that is also what I presented on Monday, that I'm interested in this kind of interaction between declaratively and symbolically represented information at the red layer with trained models and intuitive behavior at the yellow layer. So in direction of hybrid AI or neurosymbolic AI, I think it's very important to eventually methodologically reflect these insights from moral psychology. You find more about it in own papers, for instance, recently published here in Artificial Intelligence, of a proposal of such an architecture in such a direction, which we currently explore and further investigate in case studies. So the idea here is that you have this intuitive AI reasoner. I really here methodologically don't care whether this is a sub-symbolic system or itself a combination of system that is reacting fast and instantaneously to input from the environment, as you see here. And it's suggesting an action. An autonomous car continue driving forward, or now make a left turn or something, or in other contexts, other kind of suggested actions. And instead of relying on the idea that this AI reasoner is already very good in its legal and ethical reasoning, I would say we want an explicit second control layer, at least for most critical suggested actions. And have this kind of suggested action, if it's identified as a critical one, undergo an explicit reasoning against ethical or legal theories that we declaratively, symbolically formulate. And then a check could be performed, given the information from here, whether such a suggested action is compliant with these kind of theories, which we symbolically represent. And that is coming from human side in a democratic process, for instance, official legitimation via European or national processes. So that would give you a completely different layer of where you actually look for explanations and verifications. So reasons would be created on the symbolic layer. I am allowed to perform that action because of that and that and that and that, or I'm not allowed to perform a certain action. Or you could even try to verify such a layer, because here you are again in the area where you symbolically represent, and we can establish an precise notion of formal verification eventually. So that is my research position, but this is of course basic research in many parts, because now you are challenged. How can you translate legal theories into logical formalizations? And how can you make sure that you capture with the formalization on a computer what you really mean by as a legislator? So that is a problem in itself. And then what we know in the area of logics, that you have many different choices there. The area of deontic logics questions, for instance, the question on the right way to deal with the notion of obligation in formal logic. And so that's an entire dynamic research field in itself. So we have developed a kind of environment where we can deal with many different logics, replace them, and then check legislation against different variants or formalizations against what the implications really are. And that is current state of our own personal research. The entire proposal in this direction is not new. it has already a quite long history. It goes back to papers in 2005 and so on. You see here Selma Bringsjord mentioned and others, or Wallach and Allen and so on. And it was even slightly inspired by influence from military side in the US, because they saw that need eventually for these kind of legal or ethical governance of AI systems. Well, this is really now just to skip over. You find in our work different papers where we address, for instance, now formalizations of ethical principles, like here an emendation of Kant's categorical imperative, the Alan Gilbert's principle of generic consistency, and other works we have looked at, in particular David, who is also here in the room. And recently I was really delighted to see that this work can meanwhile be followed by independent researchers as well, that are not having the training from our group in logic and to conduct these particular experiments, because Levanya Singh, she got a degree in CS and philosophy law at Harvard. It just got a Best Paper Award for this paper, Automating Kantian Ethics, where she used exactly our approach to do that. That was the Best Paper Award last week at the German AI conference. So look at that. It was a bachelor thesis, which made it then into this Best Paper Award. Okay, one of the final slides. So I want to point you to the crucial role of language here. And I mean by that, not a simulation of language, but understood, semantically understood language, in which we as humans actually communicate our constraints, our legal ideas, and ethical values. And I think that should also obtain a critical function in the communication between humans and computer systems. So language is key, but deep language understanding is important, because in the long run, you have then formalized knowledge in a system that you can easily change. So if you want to change, I don't know, in a street road act, the speed limit from 30 to 50, then it's a simple change in a symbolic language representation. And you don't have to retrain thousands of models to actually now, you know, react correctly against such a minor adaptation of previously trained models. So language is important for us to actually communicate changes also regarding our value systems, regarding our legal systems, and so on, but understood language, not simulated and trained language as we do it currently with our language models. So I have to point again here to the fact that I'm addressing high-risk applications of AI. I don't propose such methodology for low-risk applications. And for high-risk applications, I would even say that these requests for transparency and opening the black box might be not a good idea, because think about some of these critical applications. There you have counter players. On the financial markets, you have many systems which compete against each other. So how wise is it actually if you tell your competitor, this is exactly how my system functions and these are its weaknesses? So you can imagine what will happen, right? And in military context, obviously clear that you go immediately for adversarial attacks to your system. And that is also now a motivation for arguing for such a second harness. So yeah, you can be transparent, but please don't give it to the outside in certain applications. It might be useful to be transparent for the interaction with such a harness that controls the functioning of the system, but some information you probably don't want to give away for good reasons. So the request for transparency for me isn't the solution to all of the problems we have here for creating trusted AI systems in particular. That are my takeaway points, and I think I just leave them like this for a second, and you can read them while we eventually soon already jump over to the next presentation then.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation today. My goal today is to present you the new ISO standard 247487000, sorry for the long number, which we call to be dealing with what is called value-based engineering, including value-based engineering for AI systems, in an attempt to build better system, even with values inside, if you want to, even if, and especially since we have just learned from Giovanni that the AI Act won't make it, you know. So it is actually what we need is, but I won't make it alone. So what we need is processes in organizations which allow innovation teams and engineers to think about values from the beginning, and to make sure that they are not hurt later on when humans interact with systems, on AI systems specifically, and or that they actually do something more, that they foster human value and virtue in a positive sense, so that AI systems are not put to the use of profit, but are put to the use of humanity. So this was the high goal of this, the development of this ISO standard. And so how can it be done? What is in the standard to take care of? Now, just a little bit of background. The standard was actually developed within the IEEE organization, which is the largest standardization organization in the world. It has, for example, developed the wireless LAN standard, which allows us right now to communicate here. And from 2016 to 2021, I co-chaired the standard, which at some point involved 154 experts, and 34 people were really permanent working group members. And what the standard is doing, as how can you imagine such a document? It is a standard with 4 big processes that have activities and tasks and definitions on how an organization can start from, let's say, has a little system of interest, has a minimum viable product, for instance, from a design thinking exercise, and now wants to determine what should this system actually be good for, what values can it foster, and what values do we have to protect if we put this minimum viable project out there. So how do we have to, does it need to evolve? And what, how do we get from first value ideas that we have here in the middle value exploration to actually system requirements, also requirements for the AI itself? So and these processes were developed and drafted, and then all in all, over 6 years, there were at least 1,000 comments coming in from, again, external experts looking at whether the processes would really work for companies and for engineers. And we corrected and improved the standard over 6 years. And then in the end, 93% of the 70 people who looked at it said, yeah, okay, you can put it out there. It will work, hopefully. And so now what's inside? Let me tell you what companies need to do. So the first phase, the first phase would be to prepare the grounds. That is to understand in what context will my system, for instance, an AI system, be embedded, and what are the stakeholders that are relevant here. For instance, if you implement an AI system in a drone, then you have a completely different context than if you run a chatbot for people who are interested in your company on your website. These are completely different areas of use. Sometimes even the same AI system, let's say picture recognition, yeah, facial recognition, could be used in an autonomous drone for autonomous killing. But it can also be used in order to run the entry gate of a big building, right? So as a result, you have you have almost the same technology in the end in terms of its capabilities, but it makes a difference of whether you use it in an autonomous drone for killing purposes or at the entry of your building. And the stakeholders will be very different, and hence the the recommendations on how much it needs to be tested, for instance, will also be different. So the first question is always, what is the context? What are the stakeholders? What are the partners? When I have understood the system, this landscape of where my system will work, I will go, there is a next phase, and I will try to go with stakeholders and understand and elicit values that are relevant. Now, if you talk about a big entry building, you might be asking people for privacy reasons, do they want to be screened when they enter a building? That's and you may get different answers. A value like privacy will be very key then, perhaps, yeah. But if you think about the autonomous killing drone, and you know the Stanford project that looked at how drones are actually, once they have been in a region, as they're flying away, and then they sense that something is still moving, then they're flying autonomously back to kill everything that's still moving. And so people who live in those areas where autonomous drones are used for killing purposes, they have certainly a different problem, a different value at stake than privacy. It's life, and that is actually at stake here as a value. So we need to really thoroughly understand the very distinct values at stake in a context where a system is used. And then depending on that context and depending on the values that we find relevant, we need to derive system requirements that are going to the product roadmap of the system to be designed. Yeah, so that's the third phase. And when the standard does what I just said, look at the context and talk to the people involved, not only direct stakeholders, but also indirect stakeholders. But then it also looks at the system's configuration as it is right now. That's why it's also a technical standard. So we look at, that's crucial for AI. What components are actually running in the control sphere of an operator? Like here in this example, I'm talking about a smart toy. Yeah, if you have digital intelligent toys that talk to kids and actually can do a lot of things like a little friend, yeah, there are system components that are running in the toy or under the control of the manufacturer of the toy. And then a lot of the AI functionality of foundation models and skills will be running somewhere else, will be running with and being under the control of an AI provider. And if you want to analyze the ethical implications of AI, it's not enough to say, okay, I know the stakeholders, I know the context. I also have to know what components are interacting with each, technical components are interacting with each other here, and of some of those I have control and of others I don't. Because there is a huge threat that, you know, as a, let's say, take a toy provider, but also a killing drone. If there are black boxed component skills that I'm pulling into my own product or service, yeah, and I don't know what that black box is doing, I'm having a problem of responsibility and accountability. And I also don't, it's also not clear whether working together with the AI component provider, I can actually offer an ethical service. I don't know what values are inherent in the design of the AI that I don't control. So what IEEE 7000, the ISO standard, is doing is it looks at data flows. It looks at the various components that are out there that I may be using, like GPT-3 language models and others. And then it recommends that if you an AI service provider or somebody who wants to offer a service that integrates AI, like the drone, like the entry service to the building, like a digital toy. What does that call it, the data controller in the GDPR, no? the partner of the customer. What does this entity need to know about the AI component to be ethically and accountably on the safe side? Here you see that what is integrated in the standard, it says that the operator of a system of interest need to have control over the quality of the data that is used in the AI component, the selection process is feeding it, the algorithm design, the evolution of the AI's logic. And all of this needs to be aware with the help of best available techniques for transparency. And I can tell you, this is a huge challenge in organizations, because the standard model is that you are having a company, let's say, and you are, let's say you're operating a chatbot where you are operating a facial recognition system. And what you're doing today is you're pulling in from Microsoft or from IBM or from other great AI providers, those black boxes that will translate the language, translate the words, interpret the sensor data. And you don't know how the AI works. So this interface is actually highly problematic, and the ISO standard says you have to what you have to have is access to that external AI service. If you don't have access, you cannot be compliant, because then you don't actually know what's going on also on your own system that you are providing, yeah, with AI inside. Just looking at the time here. Good, 3 minutes to go. Then when you have understood your system of interest, your so-called system of system, the various AI components that may play a role, the context and stakeholders, then you actually know what you're really talking about. Then you have, and then is the question, what values could be at stake? And here we are using moral philosophy, especially virtue ethics, because as Mr. Benzmüller rightfully said, we have to integrate moral philosophies into our reasoning about what is really relevant, and human beings do that. Also, human beings implicitly, for instance, have role models. They have a gestalt perception of what's right or wrong. So they recognize immediately if somebody is, for instance, courageous, yeah? Or whether a value like dignity could be heard. In one analysis, very simple analysis of a teacher rating application we recently did, there were 6 different ways in which a teacher rating application could hurt dignity. None of these is coded in any database in order to be able to reason on it with a machine logic. Dignity is also a virtue. Yeah. So what we do in IEEE 7000 is that we are asking the stakeholders, seeing that you know now the context and the stakeholders, and you know what the system looks like technically, what could be harmed, what values could be harmed, what values could be benefited from the system, what virtues, what will the system do with human character, with all the stakeholders, with direct stakeholders' character, what will be negative effects for the stakeholders. And then finally, duty ethics. Are there some universal values that are so important that you think this system of interest should respect them? And with these 3 questions, basically, at the core of which is virtue ethics, we identify a quite normally a huge cluster of values that a system may impact. And what we see is in our case studies, and we've done quite a lot, that in all those in stakeholder dialogues, you easily find 50 to 100 values that could be at stake. And so I'm looking forward to the AI Act and to the to listed values that we are starting to have control of, because in reality, systems are highly interwoven with a value sphere. And in 7000, in this standard, what we do is we try to understand this value landscape that may be impacted in a positive or negative way. Then we build clusters and we prioritize which of these value clusters should be dealt first with by a company, or second or third. So we rank and prioritize the value clusters. And after we have done that, just to give you an idea here about what a value cluster looks like, if you take a value like cluster like privacy, that's important, then you may have various value qualities that cater to privacy in the system, like data accessibility, informed consent, transparency, data security. So these value clusters, which contain core values and value qualities, are now being translated into the system. And you see here, when you take a value like privacy, informed consent, already when you walk in with a facial recognition system in a public building and you want to be private, how do you organize an informed consent to your facial biometric data? Oof, that's not easy. And that's not only a question for AI itself, but for the whole system in which the AI component is embedded. How do you then deal with this challenge? And here the IEEE 7000 recommends that you try to understand the expectations, the criteria that need to be fulfilled in order for an informed consent to be acceptable by people. Yeah? For a value quality to be such that the criteria are fulfilled, that the value can materialize. Yeah, and these are called so-called ethical value requirements, which the IEEE 7000 recommends to formulate for all those values that are prioritized for a system. And then these ethical value requirements again are translated into technical system and organizational system requirements through a risk-based logic. And at the end, you have something like this. These are complex tables where that trace relevant system values through their value qualities and EVRs to system requirements. It's a trace that goes from principles to practice. And the trace is documented. And in the end here, the controls are going to the system's roadmap. And are combined there with those functional and technical requirements that perhaps a technical team working on the mere recognition of a face, for instance, they have a lot of technical challenges, but now these technical challenges are combined and pooled with the ethical value-based requirement that were derived from this kind of reflection process. Okay, and then the whole system can iteratively evolve. And to finish this, you can read about the details of how this all works in my book coming out now in the fall, Value-Based Engineering, which is based and integrates and explains the new ISO standard. Thank you very much.